Why do so many PhD students find thesis writing so stressful? And what can we do about it? So when you've done so much work, when you've invested so much time and energy, when you've done all of that research, it should feel like the hard work is behind you and then you just have to push for the finish line. But for many, that final writing phase can feel like an impossible challenge. Now, there are several obvious reasons why you might find writing your PhD thesis stressful. First is the sheer scale of the task, with it most likely being the longest single document you've ever had to write. It also comes with a huge amount of pressure because everything that you've been working towards for the last few years comes down to that one document. And if you add to this the fact that many PhD students have to write in a second language, and it's really not that surprising that a lot of people feel pressure. Now, of course, pressure can sometimes help with motivation. It can be a good thing. But when there's a lot of emotional investment in the outcome, it can easily have the opposite effect. So if you then face difficulties in your writing, so if you're stuck for where to start or what to say next, or if you struggle to finish sections or to write to the required standard, or if it just seems like there's too much potential material to include, it just adds to the pressure and to the stress to the point where you can feel anxiety and panic every time that you sit down to write. So what can we do to make it easier? Now, the most common advice in this situation goes something like this. So don't think, just get words down on the page. Don't worry about details or structure. Just put all of your ideas down as quickly as possible in the first draft, and that gives you something to work with that you can edit later. Now, in the short term, this can make you feel better because you start filling pages and you get a feeling of progress. But in the long term, it causes far more problems than it solves. And one problem is that the more you write this way, just getting words down as fast as you can without thinking, the more you do that, the harder it gets to edit. So if you struggle to edit 100 words, how on earth are you going to edit tens of thousands? It's going to be infinitely more difficult. But perhaps the most damaging effect of this approach is that it trains a habit of avoidance when you face something difficult. So when faced with a problem in your writing where you feel a little bit of discomfort or stress, just writing or switching to writing about something else, it does provide a kind of temporary stress relief. But all you're doing is saving up those problems and decisions for later when you'll have less time and you'll be under more pressure. But what makes this situation even worse and even more stressful is that you've trained yourself to run away from problems. So when you come back to edit your first draft, you'll want to keep on working the same way, just writing your way through, because that's been hardwired into your brain as a response to that discomfort or stress. And so ultimately, this approach destroys your confidence and it really makes the writing process miserable. But my own experience of writing was very different. I actually enjoyed writing my thesis and I got through it quickly and I wrote well, ultimately passing my defense with no corrections and getting a really quite glowing report from the examiners. And I did it by completely ignoring the standard writing advice and doing things in a very different way. So I've spent the last 12 years working with PhD students from all over the world and from a huge range of research fields, teaching them the skills and the routines to write well, to write with confidence, and ultimately to finish and submit a thesis they can be proud of. So how do we do this? Well, there are a few elements. The first thing to do before you even start to write is to make some decisions. So I'm not talking here about making an outline. I'm talking about making more fundamental decisions about what it is you want to focus on. So throughout your PhD, you probably will have come across countless papers, all kinds of different theories and techniques and ideas. And the temptation might be to try to include all of it. But the goal in your writing is not to try to show everything that you know or everything that you've done or everything that you've read. Instead, the goal should be to communicate something interesting. And to help you do that, you need to select the most important, most interesting, and most relevant material from that broader base of knowledge and leave out everything else. And as a general rule, when you're making this selection, when you're making this decision, it's best to focus primarily on your strengths because it's going to be much easier to write and because it's more likely you'll have something interesting to say in those particular areas where you're stronger. It will also be easier to defend because when you're choosing what you put into your thesis, you're effectively choosing the syllabus for your own defense or the ground that you want to defend. Now, a lot of people do the opposite and they worry more about what the examiner wants to see. But actually, the examiner wants to know what you have to say, and they want you to make those decisions. And adding things that you don't really understand just weakens your thesis and draws the examiner's attention away from your core content. The second key point is to try to separate as much as possible the process of exploration from communication. So the main goal of writing is to communicate, to take the ideas and the knowledge in your head and put them on the page in a way that someone else can follow and understand. And a big part of this is the order in which you present your ideas and how you lead the reader from one point to the next. But one of the reasons this is hard is that the ideas and the knowledge in your head, they are not stored in a nice, logical, linear order. It's more of a kind of tangled mess of interconnected ideas and insights. And this is actually useful in some ways because your brain's ability to leap from one concept to another and to make associations between them is one of the keys to creativity. But it also means that if you just write whatever comes to mind in the order in which it comes to mind, it will probably be a mess. Now, one of the justifications for just getting words down on the page is that it helps you get your ideas out of your head and gives you something to work with. But if this is the goal, then this is for your benefit, not the reader's. And just writing a stream of consciousness isn't the best way to go about it. So if you just type out your thoughts in a linear order, it can get very difficult to review or restructure once you get past a few pages. And if you have 50 or 100 or 200 pages of this kind of writing, possibly divided over multiple drafts, it's an absolute nightmare. So what you end up with is a load of text that isn't very effective at communicating to a reader, but also isn't very easy for you to work with as raw material. So what I always recommend is trying to separate the two processes of exploration for your own benefit and communication for the reader's benefit. Having one process like mind mapping, where you can just throw ideas down quickly and figure out what you have to work with, and keeping that completely separate from the formal, carefully constructed writing for an audience. So if you want to know more about mind mapping or about exploring and developing ideas through writing, leave a comment below and I'll make another video going into that in more detail. Another point where my approach differs from others is that I always start with the introduction and try to work through the document in the order in which it will be read. Now, I didn't always do this. So when I was an undergraduate and I had to write essays or reports, I'd often jump around in the document. So if I got stuck on one section, I would switch to writing about something else, and then I would try to fill in the gaps and tie it all together. But for my thesis, I decided that I would start with the introduction and I would work through each section in order, staying with each section until it was done and solving whatever problems came up before moving on to the next. So the metaphor that I use to describe this process is that it's like digging a tunnel through a mountain. So you can't start in the middle. You have to start at the edge and then work your way through. And as you go, if you get stuck, you can't jump ahead to a later section. You have to keep digging at the rock face in front of you. Now, this approach has a number of advantages. First, it means that you never have to decide what section you're working on. You're just working on the latest section, wherever that is. It also narrows your focus. So you only have to think about what you want to say right now and whether it helps to take the reader from what you've already established towards where you want to end up. And that can still be difficult to do, but it's easier to have a specific point of focus than trying to deal with the whole thesis at the same time and having multiple different things that you're working on. It also forces you to make decisions, which is essential if you actually want to get it done. And then by actually finishing sections, you reduce the mental load instead of building up all of these kind of fragments of disconnected and unfinished sections. The other advantage of working in this way is that you know what you've already said. So it's easier to avoid unnecessary repetition and to then build upon what you've already established. The next point is to let go of the idea that you need to be producing words all the time, and instead to allow your pace to vary. So as you write, inevitably, some parts will be easier to write about than others. So the areas that you know better, that you're more confident in, that you've spoken or written about or presented before, these will generally be easier to write about. The areas where you're less confident, or where there are ideas that you've only just started developing, or perhaps there are more subtle points that need careful wording, these will generally take a bit more effort. So when you come across something that's more difficult, it stands to reason that it will take more time and thought. So instead of just getting words down or writing about something else to keep the word count rising, let yourself slow down and give yourself a chance to think, to figure it out, and make a decision. So when I'm writing, I am not typing all the time. I will very often pause to think about what I want to say, how I want to express it, and how it links to the other ideas, whether that's the ideas that are already on the page or the ideas that I want to lead the reader towards later in the piece. And if I face a particularly difficult problem, I'll often stop altogether and I'll stare out of the window for 10 minutes to give myself that time to think. Or perhaps I'll go for a walk, giving myself the time I need to find a solution. But then once I've figured it out, once I've made a decision, my pace then picks up again. So I don't panic when I come across a problem. I don't rush to write about something else or to just get words down as fast as I can. I slow down, I take my time, and just try and figure it out. Now, when I talk about slowing down to think, some people raise the issue of perfectionism, which is again one of those common justifications for just writing as fast as you can. But it isn't perfectionism to put care and thought into your work. And what many people label as perfectionism is actually indecision, stemming from a lack of confidence. And there are times when you have to be a bit perfectionist and be really careful with the words that you use. For example, when you're stating the aims of your research, you have to be precise in your wording because the examiner will judge everything that follows based upon your stated aims. So perfectionism is sometimes actually essential, but of course, it can also be a problem. But it isn't a binary choice between perfectionism and writing without any thought whatsoever. So instead, we can imagine a spectrum with total perfectionism at one end and total carelessness at the other. So if you're obsessing over every word, if you're overly critical of your own work and you keep going over it because you think nothing is ever good enough, that's obviously a problem. But at the other extreme, we have the problems we talked about earlier. So the writing will be a complete mess and it will be extremely difficult to edit. But we have all of this space in the middle where we can put care and thought into the writing, but moving on when it's good enough to get the point across. And bear in mind that you can adjust where you are within this range, sometimes prioritizing speed a little bit more, and sometimes slowing down to take extra care over the most important points or most important sections. So all the points that we've covered so far relate to the general approach to writing, but of course there are also some specific technical skills that you need to know. Now there are some skills around sentence structure and the style and the rhythm of your writing, but by far the most important, so the one that I found to make the biggest difference to students' writing, and the one that I go on about in all of my talks on writing, is structure. So this is what links your ideas together and guides the reader through your thesis. And if you write with the principles of structure in mind, you save so much time in the editing process. So the key to understanding structure, as I've said in other videos, is to think in terms of problems or questions and responses. So in this video, for example, we started with the question of why thesis writing is so stressful and what can we do about it. So that very first sentence set up a problem and response structure. So in describing why thesis writing is stressful, it's essentially then just establishing what the problem is that we're addressing. So then when I talked about the standard writing advice of just getting words down as fast as you can, we can think about that as a response to the difficulties of writing. It's a response to that problem. But that response in itself creates its own problems, which I'm then responding to by describing my approach to writing. So we have this chain of problems and responses that guides the reader through. But then, within that overall structure, where this video as a whole is a response to an overarching problem, individual sections deal with more specific problems that arise. So, for example, when I raised the issue of perfectionism, it started with the point about slowing down in your writing, but some people raise the potential problem of perfectionism. So my response of slowing down maybe creates this new problem. So then I responded to that specific problem. So the same principles of structure, where the information that you present is as a response to a problem or a question, that applies at different scales, from the thesis as a whole down to individual sections or subsections. So you can think of your whole thesis or any research paper that you read as a response to a specific set of problems or questions, but then on a smaller scale, there are the specific problems and questions that you address as part of your research. So if you learn how to do this, everything else gets easier. And you might just find that writing doesn't have to be so scary anymore. So if you're still watching, what I would like to know is, how are you approaching writing at the moment? So are you following that standard approach of just getting words down? And is it working for you? And if so, how do you then turn that messy, fast writing into structured writing that someone else can follow? So leave a comment below and let me know. So if you like this video and you want to know more about what I do, head to my website at phd.academy and also sign up for email notifications so I can let you know when I publish new videos. And also check out my PhD thesis writing masterclass, where I go into all of these ideas in more detail and give personalized guidance and feedback as well, so I can relate these ideas to the work that you're actually doing. So just follow the link in the description below for more details about that. And as always, feel free to hit like and subscribe and share this video with others, because that helps other people to find these videos and it helps me to grow this channel. So that's all from me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.